Hi everyone, how's it going? I'm Robin Odie. I'm one of the analysts here at Canalys, and I lead the MSP research globally. I'm really sorry I can't be there. I've been to Portland events before. I know George really well. We talk regularly, and I really would have wanted to be there. I know they're great events. I really like what Portland's doing, and I was glad that George invited me along to discuss essentially the MSP landscape and the cyber threat landscape and Microsoft and what they're doing. And look at that from a Netherlands and a Belgium perspective. So I hope you guys enjoy the presentation. George and I put it together, and we wanted to give you the latest overview on what we're seeing from a Canalys and Omdia perspective in Netherlands and Belgium. So I hope you enjoy it. Thank you very much, and I hope it's a great event. Bye, guys.
People, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you, Robin, for having you here today in this pre-recorded webinar. It has been a while since you visited us in March, and remember you gave us the State of the Union on the MSP market in Holland and in Belgium. Unfortunately, because of your incredible busy travel schedule, prevented us for an in-person event this time, so we decided to do this on a pre-recorded version. Today we're here together, to talk about the Microsoft Mastery from risk to revenue, and we will talk you through three topics today. And it's the most important part to start with, the risk part. So, Robin, can you bring us up to speed on what it is what Canalys sees, on the risk part for MSPs, what they should be prepared for?
Yeah, sure. I think that the key thing is for today is to speak really to members of the audience at the country level. The overview of the risk right now is an interesting one because we see every year a slight shift for different sectors and different companies, which essentially means that to some degree MSPs are always in need in different sectors and for different reasons. In 24, what we saw in Belgium, for example, the key verticals for attack were really telco and ICT, healthcare and financial services. And to some degree, actually, that was also mirrored a bit in the Netherlands, but really just slightly different. So, for example, healthcare and financial services was 4 and 5 in the Netherlands in the top 5. So, really, these are the ones that consistently see the most attack, but slightly different year on year. So, we want to highlight where things were in 24, but obviously we are seeing that evolve through 25. And it's interesting when we always see stats around the world that say that ransomware attacks are kind of going up, right? Now, funnily, in 2024, ransomware actually declined slightly in the Netherlands. It was still up in Belgium. Now, the reason why we mention this is simply because we don't want to always focus on the same thing. We don't want to always focus on the same risks and always focus on the same issues. But we are obviously focusing on the same outcomes. And that is where I think from a sales perspective and certainly from a value perspective, MSPs tend not to want to get bogged down in some of the stats I'm showing here. We show them simply because we want people to understand what the landscape looks like, and that we're doing the work to gather that data. But it's not to say simply that speeds and feeds or percentages necessarily gets you to that level. It's always about outcomes. It's always about discussing that with the customer. If you look at the Belgium landscape, for example, on the latest polling and surveys that's been done there, about half of businesses in Belgium said they were subject to an attack. Now, we actually know that it was many more than that, but only a few of them were really aware of that landscape. And that, I think, is the key element when we talked about outcomes. We don't want to say 46% of businesses in Belgium was aware of an attack in 24. What we want to say is the actual number of businesses that were attacked in Belgium was closer to 96. So over half of those weren't even aware of the attack. And that is where we talk about outcomes from a technology perspective. So how do tools like Microsoft's tools help you get insight into real time what's going on the ground so that you can actually show your customers this is what's actually going on. Last year, you didn't even see these incidents. This is what's actually going on. And not only that, but we're able to lock that down and remediate that in as quickly as possible. So stats like these are actually only just scratching the surface of what partners really need to see, but actually the outcome is always the thing that's most important.
And if you then look at the number of tools that those cybersecurity companies globally offer to MSPs, where that between 3 and 11 tools are needed to run those cybersecurity practices within an MSP organization. I mean, still quite high success rate, so to say, from a hacker's perspective. What?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
I, I think well, I think the problem is that the the hackers more and more, as the old adage was always, they only need to be right once, we have to be right every time, right? Now, from a hacker's perspective, there are always vulnerabilities in tools, but there's vulnerabilities in integrations. There are vulnerabilities in the end users. People often say, "Oh, end user is the number one issue." Yes, but also technology is a close second. Like there are always ways around it. So I think that from a perspective of partners and those tools that you mentioned, every year we ask partners about how many tools they're using. And every year we technically get pretty much the same answers, which is that half of the partners are considering consolidating the number of cybersecurity tools they're using, and half of them are expanding. And the reason for this is usually because in any given year, an MSP or a customer is looking at their cyber environment saying, we're spending too much money, or we got way too many tools and we need to consolidate. And somebody has come to them and said, we can help you consolidate that. In any other year, you've also got the other half of MSPs, which are saying, we just suffered an incident and we are going to essentially look at our stack. And when we look at that, over 50% of partners in our latest poll who had been subject to an attack themselves had changed their services stack and their product stack to accommodate that. And that's really interesting, because when we asked those partners that how many of them had suffered an attack, at least 78% said that they were aware of an attack. So you see the difference between that number and the number here. Generally, partners are much more on top of what's really going on the ground.
that's crazy. So if you look at specifically the Microsoft 365 tenant, something that
Yeah.
we are going to discuss today. So we know that 71% of all existing Microsoft 365 tenants are already being breached, according to CoreView, who is a main speaker today as well today. So what do you see there? I mean, also in combination with what's happening on the tool side in terms of or in line with AI. AI is something that hackers use as well. And what is Microsoft then prepared to do? What is it what they can do? What is it what they offer to MSPs? And what is needed to put on top of the Microsoft Defender and all the tools that they deliver to the end users, and most often, of course, managed by Microsoft by MSPs.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the three most common Microsoft vulnerabilities tend to be around credential theft and session hijacking and rogue applications. There are obviously many more, and MSPs will see many different issues. The truth is that right now the biggest battleground, and it has been for some time, but we've come to a head, is identity. Being able to verify identity is something that has changed in terms of the strategy over the years. We had years of essentially passwords, which is still prevalent, and they're not going to go away overnight. Two-factor authentication, multi-factor authentication, single sign-on. There's a lot of different terminology that people are using for essentially trying to determine the same thing, which is the person logging in a legitimate user? And if they're not, then what do we do about that? So when it comes down to it, therefore, the ability to gain access to credentials still comes down to the old ways, still comes down to business email compromise, still comes down to phishing. Some of the biggest incidents that we read about at the moment are always around, usually, being able to phish or socially engineer people who are within ICT departments of end customers or MSPs, get access to credentials, or get access to old business emails that existed from people that have left companies that where those emails weren't essentially archived. And so those kinds of things are still the most at risk. So from a partner's perspective, it is most important that they have the ability to truly manage the identity of anyone in any environment. And also, if anyone is able to create a false identity, say inside an RMM or inside an end customer's environment, that we get insight on that immediately. And there is something very important going on at the moment, is that people are trying to automate a lot of things, as we know, in the MSP world. One of the things they're trying to automate is the ability to quickly onboard new hires within end customers. And one of the things that people are doing is wanting to use AI to do that. Now, the obvious answer of that is, well, if there's an AI engine that is designed to quickly onboard let's say I hire 20 people tomorrow. I want to quickly get them on board. I tell the MSP, can you help me do this? Can you get them signed up, get their laptops ready, etc., etc.? The problem with that is if you don't have oversight over that, if someone is able to get access to the RMM and the PSA through nefarious means, then they are able to very quickly create profiles for people that shouldn't be in those environments. And so you can see how AI can be used both for good and also for bad. So in that, it is essentially monitoring is still incredibly important. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that the way that we monitor things today will continue. They will evolve, but it's always a game of cat and mouse back and forth. So the three solutions around this typically are obviously training is still number one, still absolutely important. We have to make sure we train people. We do cybersecurity training here, and yes, it is takes a long time and it can be very boring, but it is also essential that we do it and take it seriously. Managing vulnerability is very important. That's essentially looking at architectures of the IT estates of the end customers and our own as MSPs. And then finally, it's all about identity threat detection and response. And that's where I think that the tools that we have today around Microsoft and third parties and other ISVs, it's getting better at using AI for good purposes, being able to see really what's going on at that moment there in time and being able to very quickly respond and potentially even completely automate the response. But again, I think there should always be a human element to that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So MSPs are here to stay. So if you look at the for the next topic, but if you look at the Microsoft, exactly, the Microsoft pure RMM play, which we have
Mm,
known for the last 20 years, when RMM was invented, when RMM was pushed to the market. Today we have, for example, the founder of Enable, who's also the founder of Augment today, here at the event. So we can ask him everything about RMM. He lived through it and created this great company, and then he sold it. And what you see with RMM after 2 decades is that Microsoft is also putting a lot of time and effort in building something that looks like, the modern RMM product, so to say, which gives MSPs the opportunity, the possibility to use not per se an RMM product, but another product,
yep.
where you can manage Microsoft, where you can manage the like policy posture management, like everything that's needed to make sure that the M365 user is being held safe, and then skip RMM and go pure to what Microsoft offers today. So maybe elaborate on that a little bit more, what the crowd can expect the coming time forward, how Microsoft is crawling into that MSP domain, which is super interesting, of course.
Yeah, essentially what we've seen over the last kind of probably 3 years is a blending of RMM into more kind of unified endpoint management. We say unified, that's probably not really the right word, but that's the term that people are using. But essentially, it's about recognizing that some of the tools and functionality of RMM aren't necessary for every partner for every endpoint. Sometimes all you need to do is just set up and configure what's going on. You don't necessarily need to develop all the functionality of an RMM for every endpoint that you're managing. Um, and I think that what we have seen, of course, is for partners, particularly as Microsoft changes its programs, changes its products, changes its incentives. The most important element is that partners have essentially looked at their environments and said, look, the most expensive thing that we have is Microsoft on its own. So let's see how we can double down and do more with that. Um, and customers are doing the same, which is where we've seen a lot of incentives change. So for the last few years, Microsoft has essentially wanted its reseller community to build managed security services a lot more. And that has gained traction, but not perhaps as fast as Microsoft wanted it to. And so we are seeing a lot more incentives around building up E5 licenses for new purchases, which is plays hand in hand with what Microsoft really wants to do, which is it wants to incentivize new customer acquisition, and it wants to kind of spread that digital transformation, I guess, of more and more businesses around the world. Many millions of which still aren't really fully digital. And in some cases, if you look at cyber incidents, maybe that's not necessarily a bad thing. But in the case of Microsoft, new customer acquisition is incredibly important because they want people to use its network, they want people to use its tools. Uh, Also, it's key to remember that in the case of the discount on E5 licenses, for example, there are obviously caps on the amount of data per user per day, and that is something for partners to be aware of. So, it's a certain number of megabytes, yes, I said megabytes, per user per day for data ingestion on some of the basic licenses. And obviously, if you want more than that, then you have to upscale into new packages. So this is really just about a base level of selling into new customers. But we have seen, despite some restrictions, a considerable number of partners blending Intune with their RMM environments and also moving more into mobile device management, particularly as partners take on more Mac environments. And that's where we actually see that the more work that Microsoft can do to help natively manage Mac, Linux, Unix, the better, because it doesn't stop partners from being able to manage those customers who perhaps might have come to them and said, can you help us manage these? And maybe a partner would have said, well, it's not really what we do, but we know someone else who can do it. Now, more and more partners potentially could do that just through Microsoft and have if one single pane of glass, at least fewer panes of glass. Finally, I think that the thing is the stick element. So there's a lot of carrots to this, but then there's the stick on Microsoft's side, which is, Microsoft is obviously removing a lot of support at the moment from a number of different models. Is trying to consolidate the number of partners it has to manage. It's trying to push more and more to CSP, something that obviously you'd be well aware of. There are fewer and fewer partners that are going to get access to direct bill, access to support packages, etc., which is going to put more burden on companies like Portland. So to the partners out there, I would say, look, if you see some of your kind of big distributors and big CSPs who are struggling with support models, struggling to try and get more and more partners onboarded because of Microsoft's incentives, give them a break, let them get up to speed. It's a really tough business model for anyone out there. And essentially, it requires us all to work together to provide that kind of end customer experience, which is ultimately the final point that we want to get to. So for those MSPs, they are likely, certainly for those, as we know, there are MSPs that are managing 3, 4, 5,000 seat organizations here and there. They may not be their core, but they have them. They are likely to see more and more competition from Microsoft as Microsoft looks to deliver support direct. And I'm sure there are MSPs in the room that will recognize that.
Yeah, these are great developments, if you ask me, and it will shake up the market a bit. And it's also one of the reasons why we at Portland take Microsoft 365 as not being an official distributor for them, which we don't want to be. We partner with another partner called Cloud Factory, also today available for a good conversation and a great keynote. But what we see is that the buying process managing Microsoft, that by looking into the statistics and listening to software companies, to MSPs, from people from different regions, US, UK, that a lot of MSPs still think that if you sell Microsoft 365 or you manage that environment, they think that Microsoft will take away a lot of your burden. But it's a shared responsibility, isn't it? You have to make sure that the tools that you're using or the products that you're having in your tech stack can do the job for you, and that you have to take that responsibility very, very serious, despite the fact that Microsoft, being one of the most hacked companies, I think, in the world, is indeed, coming close to the MSP space more and more. So, yeah, interesting developments. So, if you look at it from a opportunity or revenue perspective, what is it, what MSP should be focusing on, and what's happening in the Netherlands and in Belgium. So, these numbers look quite promising. So maybe you talk us through what you guys see from a Canalys and Omdia perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the first thing to say is obviously that the stats here are sort of latest annual records, and I'll provide you guys with a forecast for what we saw in 24 and what we're expecting to see in 25. But the latest verified numbers for both of these countries from Canalys and Omdia is that 9.2 billion was made in managed services revenue just by channel partners. That's not MSPs, that's all channel partners that deliver a managed service, and that there were close to 7,000 partners doing that. The total number of partners grew that were offering managed services grew almost 2%, and the number of MSPs the same. It's interesting because actually when we look at the stats for last year and this year. Last year, the growth was slightly lower. We anticipated growth in the Netherlands closer to 10% in 24. In 25, we're actually expecting that to go back up to around about 11% again. To some degree, uh, that was primarily because there was a lot of uncertainty last year. And actually, when we asked the question around what is the main challenge for partners this year in our latest Canalys channel survey, what we got back was that geopolitics and volatility is the number one challenge that people are seeing. Now, those challenges change every year. They're usually the same five. It's usually kind of skills, tech complexity, customer budgets, geopolitics, etc. Geopolitics was number one this year. For a lot of good reasons. It creates volatility, and volatility is generally bad for business. But 24 was an anticipation of that. People anticipated that. There was some budgets cut back. It did touch managed services slightly, but not as strongly as it did in other sectors. So we expected to see probably this number grow compound over the last 2 years of around about 10.5%. So if you do a kind of compound annual growth rate on 2 years of 9.2 billion, you'll get to your likely figure for 2025. The number of partners is an interesting one. Because as you'll see, the vast majority of people that deliver managed services aren't MSPs. They are hybrid partners, resellers, SIs, etc. So many of them are mid-market and enterprise size organizations that are delivering hundreds of millions or billions of dollars of revenue in managed services, but don't have a setup for the SMB. And so that is where small market MSPs are still absolutely vital. And as much as we hear a lot about M&A activity, there are still more MSPs in the market than there were 2 years ago. And the reason for that is because if you see the amount of money in the market, that encourages new entrants. We are seeing people come in specializing, particularly around certain technologies. So, not just around IT support, but really around cybersecurity and AI consulting. And we're also seeing the kind of reality of business, which is it takes a lot longer to sell a business than it does to set one up. And that's the truth is we see the headlines around M&A, but we don't see the headlines around startups. So that's where sometimes people are surprised. They think that the market's consolidating. It's actually growing. So there's more competition in the market now than there was before. But we are also seeing larger MSPs being built out of that acquisition. For Belgium, obviously the market's slightly smaller, but some similar stats in the sense of growth of MSPs. Obviously, higher growth on a slightly more smaller number as well. Now, 24, the growth in Belgium was also double digits, very strong. My anticipation, my estimate right now was 24 was closer to 12% in Belgium. This year is probably around about the same. But the managed services that are being sold are really focused around cyber. And that's the most important element. And that's partly to do with Belgium's position in the EU and the amount of attacks that it's subject to, particularly in the enterprise and government side of things. But this is kind of where we see the market today. So very healthy growth in both markets. But as with almost everyone else around the world, the profitability of basic IT support models is going down and the requirements for specialists is going up. The benefit for any partner that's wondering about having to transition their business more and more towards some of those specialized services is if you do, you are also making yourself significantly more attractive for M&A activity. So if you spend a couple of years transitioning your business, you will find that your multiples, if you're looking to sell at any point, will go up quite significantly.
Yeah, and we talked about this before in another meeting. For all those MSPs out there who are thinking about selling their company within a couple of years, I think it was you, Robin, and your colleagues at Canalys that had created an estimate of 2027 when there's going to be another big blowout, so to say, in
Mm-hmm.
terms of M&A activities in the IT channel globally.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit more? Why you think that is going to be the case in a couple of years from now?
Well, I think that the main reason is because at the moment we see a lot of people that are building specializations, but those specializations haven't necessarily come to their full first phase of maturity. So, for example, we are seeing a lot of people build specializations around AI consulting, But the truth is, a lot of customers still getting their head around how AI is actually going to work for their business. So it's taking a couple of years for those partners to build up real use cases around integrations of whether it's generative AI or even localized AI into end customers that actually creates what we would call a viable business model. And so by 2027, however, some of those new specializations will have been solidified. And so a lot of those partners and those businesses will become very, very attractive. Now, from an established partner perspective, we are consistently seeing resellers with a minority of their business from managed services being acquired. So companies in the 1 to 10% of their revenue from managed services that aren't able to transition to that next level, they are generally being acquired for scale. And we anticipate that 2027 will be a time when we'll see a significantly larger proportion of acquisitions. It's also a time, generally speaking, where we tend to see a spike in activity the year before major election cycles.
Mm.
So it's usually like, for example, 2023, we saw a huge spike in business in managed services. 2024 was the year of elections around the world. We'll see the same thing probably around 27. Now, that's obviously a forecast estimate of how things work in a macro environment, which can always be a little difficult to predict, but that is one of the reasons why those predictions exist.
Super interesting. And today, the whole Microsoft mastery from risk to revenue, this is what it's all about. This is the reason why we wanted to organize this event today. And Robin Smith, he will end the day today with explaining how our vision is on building a company with growing profitability. So EBITDA times multiple, something that everybody talks about these days. 10 years ago, you never heard it. But let's say that the program we have built literally around that, from looking at your business economics, then make a great inventory of your technology stack, look what is needed, and then how to consolidate your technology stack to become a super lean and mean money machine, so to say, means that you have to start how long before you're going to sell your company? 2 to 3 years?
Yeah, I think 3 years is usually the safe bet. It takes that long takes about a year just to analyze your business, and then it takes another couple of years to start transitioning it.
So we're in a hurry, man. So do you have any other things that you would like to share so that MSPs are be like well prepared when they're going to make that next big step in their lives, or what you would recommend them doing? Like from a most important topic, what you have seen the last couple of months. Anything you want to share?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of wanted to end on the kind of estimates for growth in cyber. Obviously, everything we're talking about today is around cybersecurity, and one of the key things that we always want to bring from Canala's perspective is country level data. It's the most important thing, and it's the thing that everyone always gets asked for. So I wanted to kind of end with some country level cyber estimates forecasts for 25. As you can see, some of the key areas for growth, and the reason why I mentioned vulnerability and identity and web and email earlier, these are the fastest growing areas. And they are fastest growing because customers are aware of the threats. MSPs are building skills around the threats, and more vendors are providing go-to-market models around things like MDR, XDR, and that includes a lot of these technologies as well. There are a lot of technology vendors in these spaces that are providing services to partners that can then pass them through to end customers. But we shouldn't necessarily think that endpoint security isn't growing either. It is. It's still growing very strongly. And I think both in the Netherlands and in Belgium, we're still seeing double-digit growth on both of them, which is excellent. It's a very fragmented market. That's not likely to change overnight. Specializations are required, and so we still see more vendors being created there. But it's key to look at kind of what's happening in the market, what the anticipation is, what the forecast is. If you're looking at this and you're already in these markets and you're wondering what kind of growth you should be aiming for, then these stats are really for you. If you aren't in these markets yet and you're looking for the highest growth areas, then these are also for you too. Look around web and email, vulnerability, and identity. These are the things that are most likely to be in demand from customers. And it's also the areas that are most likely to see the highest incentives from vendors as well. It's also where we see obviously Microsoft putting a lot of its own business as well as its third-party alliances and ISVs being invested in. So I wanted to kind of end with that, just to give people some key country level stats, along with the MSP stuff, and hopefully people will find that useful for the coming year.
Yeah, absolutely. Super helpful, and I think that and useful. I think that if you look at those stats and everything that you have collected, specifically indeed on a country level, is something that you miss, most of the times when you read those global stats, etc. So great having you again. Great to host you again, Robin. We'll bump into each other again soon, I think, on one of those events we see. It's again a pity that you couldn't make it this time. We will have you in person the next time again. So I want to end the conversation together by again thanking you and wishing everybody a great rest of the event. And talk to you soon, Robin.
Thanks, George. Bye.